Hi there, this is Jason Horsch, owner of Xanadu Gallery. I'd like to welcome you to another RedDot podcast. This is episode 2. We're recording on March 29th, 2017. And as I begin, I'd like to thank all of you who listened to the first episode and gave me feedback. Your input is appreciated and hopefully helps make the podcast more interesting, more useful to you. Today, I mentioned in that first broadcast that I wanted to present a variety of different topics, subjects, and formats. And today, I'm pleased to start with an interview. I'm going to be interviewing Dave Newman, who is an artist that I've been working with at Xanadu for over 10 years now. And we have a great relationship, and I'm looking forward to having a conversation with Dave, both about his art, but also about his kind of the development of his business as an artist and his professional career. And hopefully we can share some insights that will be useful to you in your career and just have a great conversation. So again, I'll be looking forward to your feedback and what you think of this format. So first, let me welcome my guest, Dave Newman. Welcome, Dave.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
As we get started, maybe I'll just have you take us way back to the very beginning. A lot of artists will say that their first memories are of creating art, drawing pictures, crayons and all those kind of things. Would you say that's true for you? Was art something that came to you very early in life?
I would say not. Of course, I had a sister, and we would, do finger painting and little drawings and stuff, but I never really had that real creative spark. And I think I wasn't really a drawer where I could really draw like some kids in school. So I always thought, well, I can't really be an artist if I can't draw. And of course, that's a nice help. But so I think I put it aside, never really thought much about it until later on in life.
So it wasn't necessarily something that came naturally to you, but as you kind of look back on early life, are there events in your early life that you feel have had an influence on your development as an artist, or did the art all kind of just seem to happen later in life?
Yeah, it pretty much happened later in life. I remember taking art classes in high school just because I took it because I thought it would be easier than music. I have dyslexia, and it just seemed to be very difficult for me. And it's still, the art spark just didn't really, hit until really in my 30s. We had a screen printing business, and I started reading about Andy Warhol and Robert Rauschenberg and all the pop artists. And that's what really kind of got me into art and started reading about it. And then it just kind of, it just clicked that, I really want to become an artist.
And where did you grow up? Give us a little bit of your background.
I grew up in Anaheim, California, just down the street from Disneyland. And it was a great place to grow up, obviously with Disneyland and Knott's Berry Farm and the beach and the whole California scene. I got into cars and motorcycles at an early age, and I also remember driving around with my parents at night in the Disneyland area, and the motel signs really, the blinking neon and the color and everything just really made an impression on me. And I kind of brought that into my art as I started, becoming an artist, and I still do to this day incorporate all those memories.
Yeah, and I'll be sharing some images of Dave's work, and obviously you can see Dave's work on our website as well. And I think that, if you look at that work, you'll definitely see that there is a looking back at the big colors that Dave's talking about, the neon and the signs and the large graphics, and it's clear that obviously had a big impression on you. You mentioned screen printing and that. How did you kind of fall into or work your way into that business?
Well, I was a bellman in a hotel, which has absolutely nothing to do with art, but it did give me a good course on how to speak with people and how to relate to people, which would help later on. I had a roommate that was a sign painter, and he introduced me to screen printing and sign painting. So that's how I kind of got into screen printing, and I wound up opening my screen printing business in our garage in Anaheim. And then we moved on to a shop and a bigger shop. And that's what kind of got me into art. And then, like I said, reading about the artist and going to museums and galleries. And I was just obsessed with becoming an artist, basically.
As far as the screen printing, what were you printing and who were your clients? How did you develop that business?
It was mostly commercial accounts like restaurants, car clubs, hotels, very commercial. And then I started doing serigraph printing for artists. And I realized how difficult that was to do to please artists, which rightfully so. I mean, everyone wants it to be perfect, and we all know how it is to have colors correct. But I realized that wasn't really what I wanted to do. And what I really wanted to do was do my own pieces. So I started doing some early screen prints because of Andy Warhol, and that kind of got me started, and kind of went on from there.
So you start creating your first works of art, and did you know right away that that you both enjoyed it and that it was something that you'd want to show other people and start to sell?
Yes, the beginning works. When you look back, I mean, some are really great and some are really bad. I remember going to a museum show and seeing. Frank Stella in Los Angeles, these giant aluminum like wall pieces that were all painted, and I thought, oh, gosh, that is just the greatest thing. So I went home, I tried to do it, I did a little piece, and I wound up throwing it away, which I wish I had kept now as a reminder. But in the beginning days, your family, your friends are always very supportive. I wouldn't say not that my family was that supportive, but my friends were, and especially my wife Donna has always been very supportive, and it just in the beginning it's really hard because you don't know when you can call yourself an artist. I had a hard time, like, what do you do? I'm an artist, and how do you know when that is? When you're selling work, when you feel you've arrived, or it's a really funny thing.
So how did you sell your first piece? How did that process start?
Well, we had a costume jewelry business after the screen printing business, and we did pretty well with that business, and allowed.
This is still in California?
Yes, sorry. It was in Rancho Santa Margarita in Southern California, and it gave me the opportunity to pursue my art career while Donna pretty much ran that business. And so I got a little studio and started really trying to become an artist. So I'd sell some pieces to some friends, and I'd enter, little gallery shows. And eventually that business, the costume jewelry business, ended because of the fashion industry just kind of changed. So we found ourselves with basically no income, and we decided to do outdoor art shows. And so we just started doing outdoor art shows, and we were doing about 17 shows a year. And we did that for about 11 years and traveled all over the country.
That's really interesting. And I think that's a path that a lot of people can understand. And I guess, first of all, I'd say it probably, and I'm trying to think how to say this a little bit delicately, but yeah. Probably there was a little bit of naivete in thinking, well, our business isn't working out, so we need to make some money. Let's go sell some art.
Well, yeah. And, we've been self-employed since 1980 with the screen printing business and the button cover business, the costume jewelry business that we had. We just thought, well, we've always worked for ourselves, and I had a lot of confidence in myself. We figured, well, all our other businesses worked, why shouldn't this? And maybe that is being a little naive, but it did work out, and I was selling work right away. I mean, just like any other artist, it's not always a steady flow, but it was enough to make a living in the beginning, which you can't ask for much more than that.
How did you kind of figure out how the shows work and what you'd need to do? Were there other artists who helped you, or what was the process of building that successful show and festival business?
Yeah, back then, the internet wasn't as big as it is now. So there was some like magazines and things that you could get, and I, became friends with other artists, and you'd just ask, what shows are good and what would be a good fit for my work. And we were still in California, and we started actually doing art shows in Arizona in the Carefree Scottsdale area. Those were some of my very first shows. And actually, the very first art show I ever did was here in Prescott before we even moved here. And I think if I remember right, I think I won second place in mixed media, which was very exciting for me for my very first outing. So yeah, that's how we kind of started finding out about art shows. And then you go to an art show, you ask someone, what's your next show you're doing? And they'll say it's this show. And it's like, well, how is that? And it's kind of like a traveling band of artists that just kind of share information. It was really a great experience to do the art shows. I never have regretted doing those.
My experience with you and Donna is that you are great at building relationships with people and just talking to people. And did that all kind of come naturally to you? Were you prepared to do that at the shows?
Well, I think you almost have to. If you can't talk to the people about your work, and you don't want to be the brooding artist that sits in the corner and here's my work, come buy it. It just doesn't work that way. And I over the years, doing art shows, I'd see artists sitting in the corner reading or sitting there and looking disinterested. And I think you really have to be, and we were never high sell, high pressure people. We just were ready to talk to people about my work and answer any questions. And like I said, being at the hotel and talking to people, checking people in, and being a bellman, I think really helped me. And of course, Donna's really good at it, and she's taught me a lot too. So it's really, I love just like we're talking now. I love talking about art. I like talking about business, and it's just really a lot of fun.
That ability to interact with people and engage people was certainly a big factor in becoming successful in the show circuit. Are there any other things that you'd point to that helped you and Donna be successful in the circuit, or that you'd recommend other artists try doing?
Well, when we first started doing the shows, the internet wasn't as big, again. And these days, with the websites and social media, and you can promote yourself in such a great way. I think just networking when you meet people. We own our own little gallery here in Prescott, and that's also a nice bonus for us that I can push my work and send people to other galleries like yours and the other galleries that I show with. But I think just really having a partner helps that really believes in what you're doing and striving for the same goals. I think if we were both artists, it might be difficult, because I've known couples, and that can be a little, I'm not saying it doesn't work, but I think it's a little more competitive, and I think it helps having one person help run things, and that frees me up to be really creative like 95% of the time.
Do you still have, it's been a number of years since you stopped doing the shows, but are there still clients and other artists that you stay in touch with from those experiences?
Yes, definitely a lot of collectors that have collected my work from the mid-90s have stayed in touch and have bought works up, at this point. And a lot of my artist friends are from those days. It's just really a good experience to get out there, put your work out there in front of total strangers, get feedback. It's kind of like it's like Facebook, except it's in real time and you're out there. And it really, I don't know, it's exciting to me to pull up and set up your tent and see your friends. It's just very exciting and fun, and to sell your work out there and get comments, good or bad. You do develop a pretty thick skin, I think, out there, because you hear everything. But it's all good, and the friendships are very long term, and it's really I don't see really any negatives at all doing that.
And then at some point, you and Donna decided that though the shows were successful, that you were kind of ready to move on to the next phase of your career and start working with galleries. So what led to that decision, and what was the process of transitioning from doing the shows to reaching out to more galleries? Well,
like I was saying, it was a great time to do shows and really a lot of fun. But towards the end we did it for 11 years, I was starting to get a bad attitude. And I've had that in jobs that I've had when I was younger. And I realized if you've got a bad attitude that it's time to probably move on. And I thought that was probably a good time to end doing art shows, which coincided with us opening our gallery, and that was a way to get off the show circuit. We were very lucky and fortunate to get a space like we have. It's a small space, but it's very manageable. And it really was tough in the beginning, and we wondered if we had made the right decision. We had opened up 2 months before 9/11, and it was, as we all remember, quite a hard time. But that's what really, I think, my bad attitude. And I was just tired of the weather, and it was just time to move on.
Your gallery is in Prescott, Arizona, and that's where you live now. How did you discover Prescott and decide that that was where you wanted to be and that that was where you wanted to have the gallery?
Donna's folks lived in Cottonwood, which is just not too far from Prescott, and we would drive through Prescott, and Donna's uncle lived here, and we would stay with him. And the first time I drove into town, it was just the greatest feeling ever. It was like, I want to live here. And it was just had everything that I wanted, an old town, old buildings, signage, nice people. It had a really great vibe to it. And we thought one of these days we're going to move here, and we did. And Donna's uncle Jay helped us build our house and studio, and we're about 20 miles out of town. It's just a great place. I love it. The town gets better all the time.
And so you moved there and opened the gallery and started selling your work and other artists' work and artisans' work. And then at what point did you start reaching out to other galleries to show your work in other parts of the country?
Well, I think I can't remember if I had a few galleries at the time when we were doing art shows, but I think it was mostly after, we were off the road, we opened our gallery, and, like you had said, I've been in your gallery over 10 years. I've got a gallery in Jackson Hole, which I've been with for, I think, 5 years, and Modern West Fine Art, and then Trove Gallery in Park City. And I've been with those galleries, so I guess most of the galleries did happen after we opened our gallery, just because I don't think I could handle doing the art shows and then keeping all the galleries, full with my work.
Were your early experiences with galleries mostly positive?
Well, we like to call them rescue missions. We had some kind of bad relationships in California in the early days when, I think before I was doing art shows, or maybe at the same time actually, I had a few. I think the very first gallery I was ever in was in Laguna Beach, and you had to pay for your wall space. And I would highly recommend never doing that. The gallery wound up going out of business. I'm probably lucky I got my work back. But when you first start out, you're so anxious to have any kind of interest from any gallery. And even if you don't feel good about the gallery, you still do it, which we've tried to never do again. Some experiences, I could probably do a whole show on rescue missions and pulling work out of galleries and not getting paid and horrible experiences, which maybe is a good thing to go through because it teaches you a lot about what you should and shouldn't do.
Yeah, and talk about that a little bit. I think a lot of artists, I know my dad and certainly many of the other artists that I've talked to, unfortunately, have had those kind of experiences. And then you kind of have the flip side of that where you have some really strong, good long-term relationships. And so, as you've developed in your career, how now do you kind of look at galleries and what are you looking for? Say you're out looking for a new gallery. What are kind of the the signs that you look for that you're probably going to have a good relationship with that gallery?
Well, I like to see that, if they've been around a while, which isn't always, it doesn't mean a new gallery can't be a good gallery, but I like to see how they conduct business, how the gallery looks. I like to maybe contact some of the artists that have been in the gallery and how payment has been, and I find sometimes some of the hardest thing with some galleries is just the connection of being in touch, and just even an email. Sometimes you maybe don't get a response right away, but I also have to look at the other side, being a gallery owner too, that sometimes you might have 40 50 artists in your gallery, and it's not always easy to get back to everyone. But I try and look at those things, and I've been in galleries that I thought were a great fit, and it just wasn't. Maybe because of just my work wasn't right for the gallery. Who knows? There's so many variables. It's really hard to say.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting, and just to give a little bit of the story of how we started working together, and Dave, you can jump in and correct me if I'm remembering anything incorrectly.
All right.
But this would have been in 2000, maybe late 2006. I was representing an artist that you also were showing in your gallery. And at some point, you and Donna had arranged with the artist to bring some of the work that you had from your gallery down to my gallery. And that was when we first met.
Yes.
And, right away, I think I kind of got the sense and could just see that you were both very personable and professional. And there was kind of almost... this almost sounds a little bit cheesy, but it was kind of like love at first sight kind of thing.
Right.
But from a business perspective, that's kind of what it was like. We just seemed to click.
Yeah.
Well, we were in the process of moving from our original location in Scottsdale. We were building out a new gallery on Main Street. And so, I wasn't in a position to really take on any new artists at that point while we were transitioning. But we had a conversation, and I looked at some images of your work. I don't even quite remember how I did that. If you had a portfolio or if I went to your website.
Yeah, I think I wound up coming back in and bringing a few pieces in person. I think.
Yeah.
And I think you said, well, I'm not ready right now. I think you were maybe still in the process of building out and moving and all that stuff, I think.
Yeah, exactly. I think that was in the late fall or winter of 2006, and we were opening our new space in February of 2007. And so then as we moved into the new space, I think that we talked again, and you got us some pieces. Some great pieces, as I recall, and we got them up, and we're very excited to have the work in the gallery. And it was one of those things where I just knew this was the perfect fit for us. Your work, the imagery, kind of fit my my vision for aesthetic, and so we promptly kicked things into gear and sold nothing.
Yeah, crickets. Crickets for a year. I think we sold one piece that year.
Yes. Yeah. I think that, and it was a small piece, and
Yes.
It was just almost a little bit, dumbfounding how, I knew it was right. You knew it was right. We just knew that we were going to do well together, and somehow our clients weren't quite on the same page, or just weren't reacting the way that we thought they would. Now, to be fair, with that timing, we should also mention that, here you are in 2007 and going into 2008. And of course that was the beginning of the recession. And so, there was just so much up in the air at that point that certainly had to be a factor as well.
I thought, well, we've sold one piece. Here's a great idea. Let's have a one-man show. And
exactly.
And not exactly, like, that's great if you've sold 20 pieces or something. Gallery's thrilled, and you said yes, and I was like, wow, this is great, and which showed that you had a lot of belief in my work, and I believed in your gallery, and we started, and then things just steadily got better and better, and It reminds me of the old artists that I read about. That I'd read about in the books, maybe the pop artists, and even before then, about that galleries that worked together for a long, long time and saw their career start from the beginning and just move along together. And that doesn't seem to happen so much anymore. And that's why, to me, this is so great, because we kind of have the same vision and goal and believe in what we do. And that's a pretty strong thing to have together to build something.
Not every relationship with galleries is going to be that way, and that doesn't mean that you can't have a successful relationship with a gallery that's not quite as strong. And sometimes there are just issues. Dave and I are an hour and a half away from one another. And so
Right.
there's some proximity there, and we can see each other pretty frequently. And that kind of encourages and engenders that relationship. And I have relationships with other artists where we sell very well and are very warm and cordial, but just, we don't see each other that often. And so it's not at the same kind of level. And that can be fine too. You'll just see that, I think, any artist who's in any relationship will know that every single one is going to be a little bit different and have
Sure.
its own dynamics. An interesting, I think, side note on just continuing that conversation about how we got started. As I recall, we had that first one-man show, and that would have been in 2008. And even at the show opening, I think that night we sold one piece at the opening, and it wasn't a big piece. It was about enough to cover the catering expenses for the opening.
Right.
And we closed that night after the opening, and it was exciting because we'd had people in and looking at the work, and there was that dynamic going on. But when I went home that night, I thought, oh man, maybe this just, maybe we're just trying too hard here, and it's just not gonna work out. But over the course of the next few weeks, we ended up selling a number of pieces, a good number of pieces from the show, and kind of sales have never really stopped since then.
Right.
Yes, there are times when we're selling more and less, but they've been fairly stable and steady over the last, we're coming up on 10 years now. So.
Yeah. And that's kind of a scary thing too, because, just because I've been there a while doesn't mean my work's always going to sell. And that's, I think that's why it's important to change things up, you want people to recognize your work, but you also want to have it fresh. And that's what I always think about musicians that come out with a great album. Then the next album, it's like, well, how do I top this? You can't sound too different, can't sound too the same. And that's hard because you want it to be fresh, and you want to stay in the gallery and be relevant. So it's really, I think it really keeps you on their toes, because there's always tons of artists that want to take your place in a gallery anywhere.
Yeah, and it is an ongoing dynamic where the only thing that ever stays the same is that everything is always changing. And
Right.
Obviously, as a gallery owner, my goal is to build these kind of long-term relationships, both with the artists I'm working with and with the collectors. But you're right, Dave, that over time, the dynamics can shift and change. You just never know what's gonna happen. That does keep it interesting, and like you said, keeps us on our toes a little bit. And you just while you're always working on new work and keeping things interesting and fresh, there we have to be thinking too about how we can display the work differently, or just kind of keep things mixed up and keep it all fresh. And it's fun. It's what what keeps it from becoming a monotony is that
Yes.
you just never know what to expect even from one day to the next.
Well, and we're lucky to be in a business that makes people happy, and that come in and buy a piece of art and you take it to their home and it makes them happy, and it's a very personal thing. It's a great business to be in. I mean, we're very fortunate. I'm always thankful for sales. Sometimes things sell all the time, and then it's like there's big lapses of time, and no matter how big of an artist or how well known you are, I think that happens to everyone. And it's very hard. I can see why people quit. I mean, sometimes you get very dejected, and it's hard to keep up and keep. But if you're really passionate about what you do and what you're working on, you just have to keep on creating, and that's what I do. And I have to do it. I want to do it, and that's what makes it fun to do what we do.
Yeah, and that's a great segue into what I wanted to ask you about next, and that is kind of what your work process is. You mentioned that you'd built a home and studio in Prescott, and I've been fortunate to visit the studio several times, and I can safely say that Dave's studio would be the envy of any artist. It's a beautiful space.
Thanks.
You've obviously designed it and laid it out in a way that is conducive to your workflow. So, talk a little bit about the studio and kind of what your work habits and routines are.
Okay. It's got plywood floors so I can make any mess I want. I've got great light. I've got heating and air conditioning and a great sound system. And it's a perfect space to work in. I'm very lucky to have it. And I basically wake up in the morning and walk to the studio from the house and start working. Unless I'm running errands or going to a gallery or going on a trip, I pretty much work here every day, and it's just my little retreat, and it's my hobby, my life, my work, my everything that I love doing is right here in my studio. So it's really a very great situation for me.
And as you're developing the pieces, are you typically working on one piece at a time, or do you have multiple works in the process? What's your approach to kind of the production side of things?
I typically work on maybe 3 to 4 pieces at a time. I do acrylic paintings. I do the mixed media work. I do assemblage pieces. I really like to keep it fresh by working on lots of different things at one time. My attention span is very short, and I have a very difficult time working on one specific piece, although sometimes I get so focused on a piece that that's all I think about, and I have to get that one piece done. But typically, I like to spread it around, and if something isn't working on one piece, I'll go to the next, and I really like to cycle around that way. It really seems to work for me, and everyone's got their way of working on things. My studio's, I would say, is an organized chaos of things.
Again, I would encourage those who are listening to go to the blog and see some of the images of Dave's work so you can get an idea of his style and his approach. And what you're going to see in that work is a lot of imagery and found objects. And talk, Dave, a little bit about where all of that comes from, how you gather both the materials and the subject matter.
Well, Donna and I have always been junkers and antiquers, and we started that probably 35 years ago, and that was well before I became an artist. And so I guess we kind of worked my finds of patina wood and metal into my art, and then I started taking photographs of our travels, and so I started incorporating my collage and painting and finding artifacts on the side of the road at swap meets, garage sales, which I still do to this day, which to me, there's nothing more exciting to pull up at a giant flea market and see all that stuff laying out there. And so I just have a huge selection of wood and metal and signage and bits and pieces of everything, old magazines, postcards. I've got an old motel sign in my studio. I mean, I just love being surrounded by all these things, mainly from the 40s and 50s. I think they're like old friends just hanging around.
I think that's a really great description, and I think that as my clients are experiencing your work, it's really interesting to see how different demographics respond to your work a little bit differently. Obviously, a lot of the imagery comes from the 40s and 50s, and so I have a lot of clients who either were growing up in that period, or maybe they were growing up in the 60s, but they would travel with their parents on old Route 66 and through the West and see a lot of that stuff. And so there's just a kind of triggers something, memories and nostalgia in my clientele. And I wonder, as you've talked to your clients, what do they seem to be responding to in the work, and what do they say about the work?
Well, I think you're right about that. They really look back at their road trips, and a lot of the things that I have in my art really remind them of that. So it's very nostalgic for them. And then you get the younger people that didn't really live through it, but appreciate the graphics and the signage and the advertising pieces and kind of are living it for the first time. And I might add, what's funny, I mentioned about being in Anaheim and growing up by the motel signs and everything, but as a family, we never traveled. I think we went on 2 trips to San Francisco and San Diego, and that was it. So when I turned 18, I just wanted to travel. And then when I met Donna, we really started traveling, and traveling has become our kind of hobby. And then it's also where we find all my things for my art and photograph things. So I think it really strikes a chord with people. They really relate to it, and a lot of graphic designers like my work, and a lot of professional people, doctors, lawyers, I think really like the work, because I think they want to do that type of thing, and it reminds them of their youth, and it's mixing all the wood and the metal and the signage and everything. It's like a giant jigsaw puzzle, and I think sometimes I wonder how can this all possibly work.
And then it does.
And sometimes I wonder too, but it does.
Yeah, and I'll also mention, that imagery and the compositions. There's something really fundamentally, American about it. And what I don't mean to be jingoistic about that, but
Yeah.
there just is, the especially America in the 40s and 50s and 60s. There were just certain looks and colors and sights and sounds. But it's been interesting to me in the gallery that a good number of the people that we've sold your work to have come from other parts of the world. We've sold to people in England and in Europe. And to them, there's a level of just the unexpected, and they just think that it really symbolizes something fundamentally different, maybe from the experience that they've had.
Yeah, the Europeans love the Southwest. I have a lot of friends that are in the UK and Italy, and they come here and it's wide open spaces. The weather is awesome. The clouds are amazing, and they just love the Southwest, and rightfully so. I mean, you just go on a road trip around through southern Utah, Arizona. I mean, the landscape is so stunning. And I also work with Fender guitars, doing art guitars for them, and a lot of I would say like 90% of my guitars wind up in Europe, in Germany and England, and they just love Americana, and the Japanese also really love Americana. I think it's just so wide open here, and the countries are so small and compact over there, and then they come here, and you can driving through Texas will take you 2 days.
Yeah, right.
So it's amazing.
Kind of bringing it around a little bit, we talked earlier about some of the early influences in your work, some of the artists that you admired. I wanted to expand on that a little bit, though, because I know you and I have had a lot of conversations about some of our favorite artists and some of the artists that you admire, and I know that your appreciation for those artists and the range of different artists that you love has grown over time and over the course of your career. So, who are some of your favorite artists, and why are they your favorites, and how do you feel maybe they've influenced you and your work?
Yeah, it's really hard to pick my favorite, but of course I have lots of favorites, which range from, like I said, from the pop artists, but Jean-Michel Basquiat, who worked with Warhol, who passed away unfortunately. He does this very great African American kind of tribal graffiti art. I like the landscape, Maynard Dixon. I like Picasso. Van Gogh is one of my favorites. I mean, I kind of call it mixed media likes. It's like my music. I like everything from punk to classical and everything in between, blues. I just get so excited when I see something I like. I don't care what style or who it is. I just like the work, and then I read about that artist, and then if I read about them and I like what they say and how they are, I like them even more. But I don't think I can say enough about how influential artists from the past and musicians and how important music is to me, to make, to take from those artists and make your work your own, but to take from those artists. and be influenced by them. But there's so many great artists out there, and all the time I hear something on the radio, or I'll see something on Facebook or something. It's like, wow, how did I miss this artist? And there's just so much talent out there. It's just unbelievable. I just like seeing art, going to museums, and just, I know I might have gotten off track. I kind of do that, but
No, but I think that I
just
think that's really, and as I look at your work, and it's not that I can point to any particular artist, but you can definitely see that we're all a part of an artistic legacy.
Yes.
And a conversation that's happening, where new things are being tried and new directions are being taken, and it's just fun to be in some small way a part of that, that conversation, and watching your work develop has really been a lot of fun for me. Here we are 10 years in, and to look back at some of the early pieces that we had in the gallery and sold, and see the development from there to the work that you're creating today. It really is just a fascinating process to watch, as again, as a gallery owner and an art appreciator, not a creator myself, but just to kind of watch that development occur.
Well, thanks, and I appreciate that. And it is fun to look back at your work and see how things have changed. And it's also fun if your artist friends to see the same thing. It's neat to kind of grow up with some of these people, some of these artists that I've known for 20 years, and see how we're all doing and striving to make it in the art world. And I want to add too that I think I still read about artists all the time, and I'm a huge fan of artist documentaries on Netflix. And there's so much out there you watch some of these documentaries, and they're just so inspirational and fun to watch. So I like to recommend that too. It's a pretty neat thing and a way to learn about other artists and just see how they work and processes. And of course on YouTube too is a great tool. I know your dad follows some artists on there that he really likes, and I think that's a great thing to get inspired by.
It's an awesome time to be alive. Just
Yes.
the amount of information available, and the art that you can see out there, the museums you can visit. It's a golden age in the sense of what you can experience if you're looking for it. And unfortunately, art probably doesn't get quite as much attention from the general public
Right.
as it did in past ages. But for those who love art, and those who want to meet artists and have art experiences, it's just amazing the resources that are available to us, both at the click of a mouse, but also just hop in your car and go visit some museums or go to artist studios and galleries. It's an awesome time to be alive.
It is, and there's many times that I'll be on Facebook or something, and it's what I like to do is join other people's pages or museums, and I can't tell you how many shows or exhibitions I would have missed if I hadn't seen things on there. And we're going to a couple exhibits coming up that I never would have known about it, and I try and think back like 30 years ago, how in the world did we know? I guess through magazines and newspapers, but I mean, it still it seems so archaic now, and I sometimes, I do yearn, because I like the past a lot because of all the things that I shoot and what I do in my art. But I think there's a happy medium between the two, that you kind of take all the best from the new and all the best from the old and bring them together. It's a nice combination. I think you just have to make it work for how you want it to work,
Well, Dave, it has been awesome talking to you. This has been a fun format, and I appreciate you taking the time to spend a few minutes talking to me.
Sure. Like I said, love talking about art and business, so I really appreciate the time, as always.
Well, and I'd like to encourage, again, those of you who are listening to the podcast to visit red.blog.com, visit the page where this is being broadcast. If you're not listening to it from there, there will be some images of Dave's work there. And then, of course, visit his page on xanadugallery.com. And if you're in Scottsdale, visit our gallery and see Dave's work. And if you're in Prescott, which I would encourage if you're out in Arizona, it is a great town. Be sure and stop by Dave's gallery, the Newman Gallery, just on the square there in Whiskey Row in Old Town Prescott. And please take a moment after listening to the podcast and let us know what you think. Leave a comment below the podcast. I would love to get your feedback, and we'll look forward to hearing what you thought of our first interview, and look forward to seeing you in our next podcast. Again, Dave, thanks so much.
Thanks a lot, Jason.